participation. Thank you so much. So I will go ahead and call the meeting of the Mental Health Advisory Board to an opening, and we will go ahead and let there be a roll call, please.
Okay. Chief Rick Bleichner.
Here.
Corey
Here.
Dan Deneen. Martha Dittmer. Faye Freeman Smith.
Here.
Gabby Bonte.
Here.
Dr. Christine Strauss.
Here.
Lori Walrab.
Here.
Trisha Malott.
Here.
Mary Campbell.
Here.
And Sharon Fitzer. So just for Julie's minutes, it looks like we're missing right now Sharon Fitzer, Dan Deneen, and Martha Dittmer, and everyone else is here.
All right, thank you. And again, thank you for being willing to add this meeting into the special meeting that was called for us to be able to complete the review of our bylaws. So we will go ahead and, but first, before we do that, we will go ahead and approve the minutes of May 20th. Lori, are you?
I'm making a motion that we approve the minutes.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you, Rick. Okay. Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, so all those in favor of approving the minutes?
Roll call.
Roll call?
Yep.
I think we're allowed to do voice approval
Oh,
now.
okay.
I mean, that's what we've been doing it at the county board.
Thank you. Okay,
Well,
so
actually, sorry. Actually, that's only if it's in person. So if it's still remote and virtual, it needs to be roll call.
Thank you, Samantha. We have Chief Rick Bleichner,
Yes.
Corey Tello,
yes.
Faye
Hold on,
Freeman.
let me say, I do have a caveat, and there's one discrepancy between the minutes, an item in the minutes, and an item in the bylaws that were sent revised to date. So we will have to take that up. So I don't know if this is the place I should say that, but there is one a contradiction that we will have to address in our continued editing.
I did notice one too, but I just figured that was probably something to work out when we talk about the actual language in the proposed bylaws. But I'll defer to Samantha on that.
If there's I don't know why my camera's not working. If there is a discrepancy, is it because the minutes need to be corrected or the bylaws need to be corrected? Because if it's the minutes, then now should be the time to discuss any changes to the minutes before you vote on them.
The one
Were you
issue
on
I
the-
saw was under section 3, but I believe the minutes are accurate compared to what we discussed. The bylaws, though, I think there would be a discussion we would want to have about do we want the minutes, what we talked about previously, to be incorporated into the bylaws? But that's just my recollection.
And I agree with Rick. My issue is that the bylaws that Amy attached, the revised to date, they haven't been approved yet. So it's so far the draft of the revisions that Amy sent out with this most recent invitation to this meeting contains something that is not in the minutes under that section. So that's where I agree with Rick. It's really, I think, involves that we're going to have to continue our revision of the bylaws and have that go back and look at that again. But it's not, but it's different than what was reflected, what was said in the minutes. So if approving the minutes means we approve, it also means we're approving the edits to the bylaws at this time. That's the problem. You know, I don't think approving the minutes means we're also approving the edited bylaws to this point, because they're still a draft. Does that make sense, Samantha?
Yeah, and I agree with you there. I think the minutes are just, as long as you think the minutes are accurate and and the minutes don't take any action on the bylaws.
Okay, all right. Then yes, I approve the minutes.
Okay, so I'll go back to the roll call. Corey, I can't remember. So Martha Dittmer is with us. She's on the phone. Martha Dittmer for approving the bylaws.
Good morning, I'm here.
I'm sorry, for approving the minutes.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, thanks. Faye Freeman Smith,
Yes.
Gabby Bonte,
Yes.
Dr. Christine Strauss,
Yes.
Lori Walrab,
Yes.
Trisha Malott,
Yes.
and Mary Campbell.
Yes.
Okay, minutes are approved. Thank you. All right, so I think in the interest of time, we will pick up the editing of the bylaws where we left off. So that was on section 6, public participation. And then when we're done, when we work through the entire document, then we will go back and fix discrepancies. Or if anybody has had additional thoughts as we've had some time to think about, what we've done. So public participation.
I have a question. The minutes said that last time there was a motion and a second and a vote on the edits. And refresh my memory, that edits, was this still on the table or did we finish this? How did we end that?
We did not finish the minutes. I mean, it clearly in the minutes, it says that stopped at public participation due to time constraints to be discussed at the next meeting. So I don't feel comfortable that we would have approved the bylaws until we had completed all of them.
Okay. Just contemplating. Okay. That sounds good.
Okay, thank you. But thank you for keeping on top of all of this. Because by having to pause mid-part, it got a little confusing. Okay, so public participation. A question I have here is, how does the public know all of this? So if someone asks to speak, are they given written information about all of this? So that they would know their time is not to exceed 3 minutes for each individual, 5 minutes for a spokesperson of a group, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, do we have something in place that is given to a potential public participant so they would actually understand what they're allotted?
I feel like that would probably be a question for me is, so in the agenda, which I can't remember if in the agenda pre-pandemic, if it states how to do public participation, but I know in the agenda right now, it has directions in there if you want to provide public participation. And so if someone, so it has in there to email me for this board. So if they were to email me that they wanted to have public participation, then I would pull up these rules and send it to them. And I would let the chairperson know, but I've never had anyone reach out to me for public participation.
But I mean, we should be prepared for that. So Samantha, how does that work for other boards? Is there, how does potential participant even know how to get a hold, know that how to request to speak?
So usually that information is in the agenda, but also, and especially recently because we've been doing things online, so sometimes those rules have changed a little bit. But as far as other entities, like for example the board rules, not the Board of Health, but the county board, those they are published on the website somehow. So and everything obviously is public documents. There's the transparency laws allow anyone to access anything that we have at any time. So putting it in the bylaws, there could be a process, and I think this is just a staff question more of like what they would like to do. Putting the bylaws up on the website or something like that kind of just puts it out there for everybody. But usually the direction to give your public comment by or sign up for public comment by email or something is in the agenda.
Okay. And Amy, that is true. That's in our agendas that go out. I mean, I'm looking at it right now.
Yes, it's in the agenda that states when to have any, and I try to do the latest to have any feedback if they want to participate, because the agendas only have to go out 2 days, 48 hours between the before the meeting, and so it doesn't necessarily give them a lot of time to, if they want to participate or have public participation, but it's transparent in the agenda on how they can reach out if they want to have public participation. And then if they did reach out, then I would give them the guidelines as it's stated in the appropriate bylaws.
And again, I'm not trying to belabor this, but I just, again, if the notice goes out 24 hours, and then we've got in our bylaws that they have to request in writing not less than 24 hours, then whoever wanted to publicly participate would almost have to, like the second the agenda is put out there, they would have to immediately request to speak in order
Well,
to fall within the guidelines.
It's 48 hours that the agenda has to be posted. And so according to where this is now for public participation, they have 24 hours to provide that. And the other thing too that helps is the date of our meetings. All of the date of the regular meetings is on.
Okay.
So then people know if they're interested in tracking it, they know when the meetings are coming up and when the agenda is going to be posted. And if there's a hot topic or something they're interested in, then they can track that and follow it and kind of have some preparedness for that. But I'll also be very transparent. And like, if you look at today's agenda, I'm sure I gave them, I'm sure that they had less than 24 hours to say they wanted to participate. So I usually give them, like, as long as it's the evening before the meeting. So the 24 hours, I usually give them more time to provide feedback, but I can stop doing that if we want to be more sticklers with the 24 hours.
Lori? Lori, you're muted, sorry.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. I was with the split screen, I was trying to find the button. A couple of different things. Normally our meetings are sort of in the middle of the week, so it's not an issue, but a special meeting could come up maybe like say on a Monday, and somebody wanted to provide notice, it would be, and so they could be doing it on a Sunday, I suppose. Then in that case, I wondered if we wanted to put, instead of hours, we want to put business days. I don't know. And I would suggest that we are sticklers, because as soon as we allow one person extra time and then not the next person, and this may not, have anything to do with you, Amy, but anybody who might be in your position could do that. And we would have some potential problems there, I would say. So if we're gonna have a rule, I think we need to be careful to stick to it, or else make the rule a little broader, easier for
Thank you.
people.
Yeah, good. I think that's an excellent comment, Lori. So do you have a suggestion on how to change the wording?
Seems like
So-
in county board, we've been over this numerous times with different things, and maybe Samantha would have a suggestion on it. I don't know whether we want it. I guess I'm wondering what the law requires of us, what the Attorney General would say was appropriate, and how broad, how long in advance.
Yeah, I
Um,
want, and I we should be consistent with the language and, what we're doing with other boards in the county.
so
And perhaps
looking,
it is.
sorry. Looking at OMA, which is where we're going to get the guidance for when the agenda for the open meeting has to be published, and it gives us 48 hours. So that does not mean 48 hours of business days, that's 48 hours. So if it were a Monday meeting, potentially, so the weekend days count as part of that 48 hours. So if you change this part to mean business days, then you might be restricting, you might come into a situation where the agenda goes out and the time to, without enough time for someone to participate, if that's what you're trying to do. And I think that's what Corey's concern was. If you wanted to, so changing your requirement and making your requirement more than 48 hours for posting the agenda, that would be an internal rule that you'd have to follow for yourselves, but that would not be, you're basically limiting yourself more than what OMA would limit you. So I just wanted to point that out, that OMA only requires 48 hours no matter business day or not.
So I suppose my question is, as long as we receive an email, let's say if there was a Monday meeting, we received the email on Sunday, we would be fine. That person would be fine.
Right.
Or
And that
Saturday.
timestamp type situation.
So Samantha, as you're reading this, then do you believe that this follows the letter of OMA, is consistent with OMA, and we are good to leave it as it is, or would you recommend any changes?
Well, right now, giving 24 hours to say that you want to speak on a subject, you're allowing the agenda to get posted first, people to see what's on the agenda, and to make a decision about whether they want to talk on that topic. And you're giving, 24 hours is not that long to do that, but it is within the time frame. So if you only have 2 days to post it, you get 1 day to look at it and 1 day to make your decision. That at least will give people the timeline the way it's written right now.
Rick, please.
No, a quick question. I know that is the 24 hours consistent with other county boards? And my reference is only because I know the town of Normal, I think, provides like 2 hours prior to the meeting. So I was just curious on that. And then the other question is, does it have to be something germane to the agenda? I assume it would be, so somebody couldn't just come in and talk about something that they, wasn't on the agenda. Those are kind of my two questions there. And then just my statements on it. I think whatever process we come up with here, if they send it to Amy and Amy, notifies them that, okay, yep, we've received it. Here's the requirements for public comment, whatever those are here, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 if you're a group. And then my experience has been also the chair, when we allow them, you would allow them to do that. It was just kind of a reminder of them, just reminding you that you have 3 minutes, and then it's covered twice. But that's just my past history and experience with some of the meetings I've seen.
Thank you. That was helpful input. So does anyone again, would you propose any language change then based on what you just said, Rick? Okay. All right, anyone else have thoughts? So having looked at that more deeply, are we as a group okay with leaving the language as it is? Okay. So here, and again, if anyone feels differently, please speak up. Okay. Not seeing any comment on that, we'll go on to parliamentary procedure. And it looks like we deemed that Robert's Rules of Order are the adopted procedures that we will follow. I don't think anything further needs to be said about that. Is that accurate? Anyone have any thoughts about that? Okay, then moving on, we will go to subcommittees specializing in behavioral health aspects of the county may be appointed. And I think we have a history of, we've done that where we've had a marketing committee and I think, you know, a sustainability committee and some other things that have gone on. So.
Corey,
yeah.
this is Rick. I just had a question, maybe just more of a process here. Committees, I think, is great. My experience with some other boards, though, they've used the term work groups because if I'm not mistaken, there you can, you know, if you have a committee and you have more of, you know, a quorum of any group and part of that committee, then you've got to post that as open meetings. And I'm just trying to make sure we comply with this. Wouldn't want to have a committee where you've got a quorum and we don't post it and then we're found in violation. And maybe it's, you know, Samantha could chime in, but in my experience, they've set limits on some of those as far as members, or they've called them work groups and they've kept them intentionally under that quorum so that there's no issue there with, you know, they can have discussions, they can work through things, bring information back, but then, you know, they don't risk a violation of open meetings. And if, you know, the group says, no, we want to keep it the way it is, I just thought I'd bring that question up in case anybody else had the same thought or concern.
That's awesome. And we do, obviously, Article 6 is about work groups. So I think what you're suggesting, Rick, is that perhaps any group formed specifically get targeted work done or bring something forward in a targeted way should perhaps be a work group as opposed to a committee. Now, Samantha, though, does Open Meetings Act apply to work groups as well as committees?
Yes, it does. So
Okay.
anytime there's a gathering of individuals for the purpose of doing business, county business, then depending on how many people there are, and if they're on a group, then or committee or some sort of board, it would trigger OMA. So yeah, I think if there were fewer people that wouldn't trigger OMA, that would be okay. But you'd have to be careful about when that happens and who's on it, because you would be subject to OMA.
So I'm going to ask again, Rick, if OMA is going to apply no matter what the title is, which of course it would, because if you were doing public business, you need to be transparent. But I'm wondering, I think was your point, Rick, that, to me, anytime you're appointing a group, it should be for a specific task with a beginning and an end date, you know, or at least a somewhat projected end date, and with a very targeted purpose. So work groups, in many ways, to me, you know, makes that clearer, you know, that there's a very clear end goal and end product, that kind of a deliverable that should come out of a work group. So, I mean, I would not have a problem with saying that we would not do committees, we would do work groups, just in terms of, you know, what, in my mind, what the definition of that is, but again, I would certainly ask all of your input on that. Do you think there's and if anybody has a point that they would like to note about, if they would see a reason why a committee different than a work group would need to be appointed, or should we just keep it clean and have one? Yes, Lori.
So to me, sounds like they would function in the same way. So I would make a motion here that we would, or suggest, I'm not sure which is appropriate, that we just delete Article 5 committees and keep work groups.
Thank you. Okay.
And just for clarification on my part, I'm not trying to do any way to circumvent OMA. I just want to make sure we're in compliance with OMA. And that was my thought there, was that if we've got both of them, what's the difference? And if we're going to have one that, like I said, I just thought we would want to be conscious of the quorum rule. That was my only thought.
Yes, and no, I in no way ever thought that you meant anything other than just trying to be, as clean as we can possibly be in these bylaws. And that really is that the goal is that, we make life not confusing for ourselves. So, okay. So again, does anyone have any, want to have any comment, strike Article 5?
I would agree with Lori's comment.
Okay. All right. And it looks like I'm not seeing any dissent on that. So, okay. So then we will just make sure we like the wording on work groups. And obviously we could put the language in there as under that, we could say, the part about after saying who it can be appointed by, we can say as needed to accomplish specific objectives. And then we could say specializing specific objectives related to behavioral health aspects of the county, because that obviously is the only work we're supposed to be doing. Okay. And I like that may include community members. And I think Amy, did we not at one point talk about, like, do we have to do anything about who's a voting member? So would there be any voting that would occur as a result of a work group that we should speak to, anything related to voting within a work group? And I guess I would throw that to Samantha. Would work groups only just like accomplish a specific objective / product, and then that would come to the full mental health advisory board to be voted on, correct?
That's up to you if you want it to work that way, certainly.
So again, I would throw that out to illustrious members here. What do we want to put language in there that says any recommendations or work product would be approved by the full mental health advisory board? Is there a need to put that in?
Just for clarity, I would think so.
Okay. Okay, so then let's add a sentence there that says objectives brought forward, or recommendations / objectives, recommendations, comma, maybe make it comma, objectives, work products, and work products would be approved by the full mental health advisory board. Is there a better way to say that, Samantha?
I think it's clear what you mean.
Okay. All right. Yes, Lori.
Thank you, Corey. I had a little concern in this. First, I think a teeny little thing would be does work groups, is it one word or two? Because it's inconsistent there, but more to the point is that I was concerned about having all these other positions being able to appoint the work group. And I thought that the appointments should go through the chair of the board, and they can be submitted or suggested or requested by these other folks. But they should always go through the chair should be the one to actually appoint the work group. It would be my thought. And I did have a paragraph about to change that. It would have to be amended now with the other suggestions. If you like, I could read it to you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Work groups may be appointed by the Behavioral Health Advisory Board Chair as needed to accomplish specific objectives. The chair shall also appoint work groups as requested by the Behavioral Health Program Manager, the Mental Health Advisory Board Chair, the majority of the Health Department, the majority of the Advisory Board, the Board of Health President, and/or the Health Department Administrator. Work groups may include, I struck the word also from there. Work groups may include community members.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does whoever's taking the notes, do you need to have Lori repeat that? Or put it in the chat box? Would that be helpful?
Well, is that, I can change it. I was just waiting to hear if the board wanted it to be changed to that language before I started changing it.
Mary, I noticed your light's on. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, I just, earlier, I think we've adjusted it, but that work products makes no sense to me.
Okay,
It's very, very awkward language, and, I mean, I think recommendations would be approved. I don't know that objectives, I don't know that fits there either.
okay,
That was all I wanted to say.
okay. So again, what I'm throwing out there is if everyone can hold in their memory what Lori just read us, and then adding to that would be the sentence recommendations would be approved by the full MHAB.
I would just go back with that sentence, and because it seems like it's a slam dunk.
Yeah,
they-
you're right.
So I don't think we should say that. I think it should be recommendations will be considered for
Okay,
approval by the full board.
thank you. Thank you, yes. Better, thank you.
If I may, Corey, I would support what Lori suggested about the appointment of work groups, and I think it would be consistent with the way many other work groups are established under other boards and committees within the county structure.
Okay,
So I like Lori's language.
yeah. So Amy, do you need Lori to repeat that?
Yes.
I could also put it in the chat box if you'd like, and we could move on. Either way. Well, I said work groups may be appointed by the Behavioral Health Advisory Board Chair as needed to accomplish specific objectives. The chair shall also appoint work groups as requested by the Behavioral Health Program Manager, the Mental Health Advisory Board Chair, majority of the advisory board, the Board of Health President, and/or the Health Department Administrator. Work groups may include community members.
All right. Much better. So is everyone comfortable with that? And again, when I throw that out there, I certainly want anyone who wants to has any further suggestions, to please bring those forward. Rick, did you have anything else you wanted to say? Okay. All right.
This is
Steve.
Gabby. I think somewhere, because it says recommendations will be considered, but nowhere are we saying that they're making recommendations. So maybe we should put somewhere that's the reason why the work group is put together to make a recommendation.
So in other words, under the first sentence where it says, as needed to accomplish specific objectives, and to make recommendations. Yeah, okay.
Sure.
This is Christine. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, good. Okay. And I don't know if I'm just completely lost and off base here, so please excuse any ignorance that I'm having when I say this. But some of the wording to me in that paragraph seems as if the chair can just put these works groups together. And I know it said with them, you know, in one of it says with the majority vote. But it seems as if the chair does not need the majority approval of the board to assign these work groups. It seems like there's a lot of flexibility for the chair to be able to do these things without the approval of the board. And I could just be misinterpreting it, but if there's a way that we can make that clear, that the chair is also responsible to represent the decisions of the board. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I don't. I mean, it would seem to me that a work group would have come out of a discussion with the group, but I see your point, whether we need to formally put that in there. What are your thoughts, Samantha?
Some groups, some boards will have only the chair having that authority, and some need the approval of the rest of the group. So that's up to you which direction you want to go and how it works.
Well, certainly we want this to be a representative body that, you know, everyone has a, you know, a voice. So I'm not sure whether, in order to really show that, whether we should add that in. So we could say work groups. How about something about work groups? I kind of want to say, you know, coming out of a discussion, and I guess what I'm trying to say is your point, Christine, I think, is that we want to make sure that the whole board is, you know, agrees that there's a purpose for doing this.
Right, and the language is in there. It says the majority of the majority of the advisory board members. So if we can say something like work groups may be appointed by the mental health advisory board chair as a result of the majority of the advisory board members' decision, or something like that. And I mean, I know you said, Corey, that it seems to be implied there, but we're being so rigid about some of the other
Yes,
things that
I
we're
agree.
discussing.
I
I don't
agree.
think that, yeah, okay.
Yeah, you don't have to, yeah, that's exactly why we're doing this. And again, I think the more that I think what we really saw as we're going through these, we really saw that they certainly lacked clarity. So it would be great if, when we're done with this, we have
So
lots of.
maybe we could use it instead of as a result of in collaboration with, because that's what we're talking about, making sure that we collaborate across, because we could end up with similar work groups or whatever. So
Yeah.
Corey, I'd like to suggest that it just say, work groups may be appointed by the Mental Health Advisory Board Chair with the approval of the Mental Health Advisory Board. as
Okay.
ne- I mean, and hopefully we're working in collaboration.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you. That's cleaner. Thank you, Lori. This is wonderful. I mean, this is a good example of it takes a village to get this so that it is really clear. So thank you, everybody, for your input. All of your input makes this a good product.
So not to throw a wrench in this, but looking at the exact language of that, would it then be interpreted that each time a work group is to be appointed, that the approval of all potential members of that work group have to come through the full mental health advisory board before that work group could begin? And so I wonder, does that then potentially delay the work getting done? And so I guess I'm just wondering, is that the intent of what everyone is really trying to communicate? Because that's at least my interpretation of that, is that each member of that work group would then have to be approved by the mental health advisory board membership.
Oh, so you're thinking it reads now that it's really like even the appointment of members to the group, like the selection of members even has to be approved. And yeah, I do not think that was I don't think that was your intent, right, Christine? It was more, you just want to make sure that the objectives that are the purpose for the work group has been sanctioned by the members.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
And that the chair was not taking that upon themselves to develop and assign work groups and chairs without the discretion of the board.
okay.
Yeah. So I might suggest that we just move some of that wording around. And while I personally do better when I sort of type myself, looking at this, my thought might be work groups may be appointed by the mental health advisory board chair, needed to accomplish specific objectives and to make recommendations to the mental health advisory board with the approval of the mental health advisory board members in order to meet said objectives, or something to that effect. That way it reads with what the intent is. That
Yes, thank
the
you for
group-
catching. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we're documenting what the intent is.
Thank you, Trish. That is an improvement, because you're right. Before I had not noted that what you noted, which it did look like it was needing to approve who could be appointed to the work groups. Yeah. So, okay. Okay. So now,
Corey, sorry.
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Having been in some situations where, not you, but on some boards, sometimes the chair may appoint people to do certain things in order to obtain a certain end result.
Got it.
And,
Got it.
And that, it just,
Yeah.
I don't think we want that to be an option here. I think we want the advisory board to be fully behind I guess the makeup of whatever subgroup or work group actually is being appointed, and it's not, no one feels like it's being skewed in any particular direction or lacks expertise of some kind.
Got it.
I want to throw that out for discussion.
So maybe, let's see, work groups. It could be work groups consisting, well, to accomplish specific objectives, using, calling upon expertise of the members, something like that, calling upon specialized expertise of the members. So
What I meant-
that we make it clear that there's a match between what we're trying to accomplish with the people on the board that have the expertise in that area. Does that make sense?
That's what I'm suggesting, is that the mental health advisory board have the approval of the membership of the it's the work group, even though it may delay something. I would think that if we were going to have a work group, it would be something that we would be discussing ahead of time, or could, if it was that important, we would have a special meeting to consider we would be considering objectives, you know, and refining our thought processes on it. So I think we would be discussing it anyway.
Okay.
That's for the group to,
So your wording, Lori, would change it to work groups and membership of the work groups may be appointed by the mental health advisory chair, needed to accomplish specific objectives and to make recommendations.
not really. Work groups may be appointed by the Mental Health Advisory Board Chair with approval by the Mental Health Advisory Board. I can't read it all, but I think we just make it clear that both the fact that the work group and its membership would need to be approved by the Mental Health Advisory Board. But I don't know if anybody sees any issues with that or has other thoughts on it.
Corey, this is Rick. If I have
Yes.
a moment, sorry, I had my hand up for a while, but then I realized my camera was frozen. So had to undock there and redock. So
Thank you.
Just kind of
Thank you for
devil's
going through that effort.
yeah, just kind of playing devil's advocate, as Lori had mentioned. I get where she's coming from. I also think, to Tricia's point about the efficiency of the work groups, I mean, sometimes pointing those, and I think, you know, we've already elected the chair. We've given the chair certain responsibilities within these bylaws to do those things and appoint those committees. And I just bring up for discussion is if the work group has to bring the end product back to the full board to be for any approval, you know, or we're having an approval of the work group, then we're having an approval of their work product. I just ask if that's necessary. And I'm not saying it's not, I just throw it out there because
Yeah.
to me, I think there's some ability to have some efficiencies by allowing the board chair to appoint, and then they've got to bring it back to the full board for approval anyway.
So because I hear Lori's concern, and to aid in the stance I took earlier about efficiency, I wonder if, I mean, as we're meeting as a board and we're discussing the need for a work group, could that initial discussion of a need for a work group also then identify recommendations for who may consist of that work group? So the discussion occurs at the time of the identification of the need for the work group. The full mental health advisory board makes suggestions for who we may recommend for it. So we're offering our input, but don't necessarily have to have the final approval. And as Rick said, the work product is coming back to mental health advisory board. And I pose that to the entire group, but I also pose it to Lori to see if that feels like a potential sort of compromise and meeting of the middle of all of the suggestions to aid in this.
Trish, it does. And I understand Rick's point as well. I just think that if we wait till we get through the whole process to see whether everybody's comfortable with all those what I would consider to be the front end piece of appointing the board members, it could be, again, another delay, or the work group members. So I guess I would like to see that happen on the front end. And so I think that's a great idea, Trish, to have that discussion. At least it would give the chair, although they may not need it, but it gives them guidance as to the thinking of the board at that point, and the feel, and that they would at least try to appoint people in the same vein as the conversation molded.
So what language, what needs to be added to capture that? Because that's where I was going initially when I said work groups comprised of people with related expertise or something may be appointed in order to accomplish specific objectives. And I would assume that would grow out of the discussion saying, if this is the objective we're going for, obviously we need people that know the most about those specific objectives for this particular work group. So that, I don't know.
Yeah, so maybe, I'm looking to see how I can keep language that already exists and modify easily. Work group may be appointed by the Mental Health Advisory Board Chair following input from the Mental Health Advisory Board in discussion to meet and accomplish specific objectives and to make recommendation. I mean, but I wonder if heading down that route.
I mean, that isn't in actuality how it happens. I mean, anytime we've had a work group, it's because we've had a discussion and said, well, we really need to bring this forward. And usually we say, I mean, usually I think my practice has been to say who is interested in, you know, this particular, who's interested in working on this particular objective. And so really some of it's been more members volunteering because they know they have either a strong interest or a strong expertise. So it does come, it really always has come out of discussion. So I think that may capture it.
Sorry, I was on mute. We may need to tweak some of the language in there. So following input from the Mental Health Advisory Board in discussion to meet the needs.
And I think we
Instead
could
of
just say
being-
following input from, I don't think we need to say following input in discussion. I think we can just say,
Okay.
or we could say, after seeking input, or yeah, I think following input's good. Does that work for people? Or following discussion within, following input from,
So the,
or we could just say with input.
this is probably one piece that I think there could be advantage to having some vagueness with the language and leaving it with either following input or with input,
Yeah,
because it doesn't inherently define it to in the Mental Health Advisory Board meeting.
Yeah.
And so it could be that, you know, the meeting and the discussion ends with, you know, if you have recommendations for individuals for this work group, please send me their contact information within 2 days.
yes.
And so I think this leaves it open to allow for a little bit of flexibility in terms of how that input is provided, especially if somebody couldn't attend a meeting.
And I like that too, because that input from one of you could include a community member that you know has great expertise that should be added. So I think the input is good. Okay, with input from members who meet the needs of to make recognition. And do we need to say, and let's see, is that awkward to, and to make recommendations to the mental health advisor? For approval, would it be, I'm trying to, again, the second part of that sentence. So we've got with input from the Mental Health Advisory Board to meet the needs, or should we just say to accomplish specific objectives? And do we need to meet the needs? I think we can just say to accomplish specific objectives, right? With input from the Mental Health Advisory Board to accomplish specific objectives and to make recommendations. Yeah, and then we can get rid of with the approval, because now we've got work groups may be appointed with input from. So I think we can change it to with input from MHAB to accomplish specific objectives and to make recommendations. And I think we can end it there, right? To make for approval, to make specific, to make recommendations for approval. But again, that's what your point was, Mary, was that it's not a slam dunk. So to make recommendations for consideration.
I then think maybe, this is my level of expertise. I can only do the grammar and stuff in this level of discussion about bylaws. But two things. One is we're titling it work groups, and then we say work group may be. And so we either need to say a work group or work groups to be consistent with the language there. And then possibly, from what you just said, Corey, and to make recommendations for consideration, then you could shorten that last sentence and say, which will be submitted for approval by the full board or something.
Okay.
And bring those two thoughts together, because otherwise that last sentence is stuck out there by itself.
Right, right. We no longer need that, yeah. So maybe we just end the first sentence after specific objectives, period. To accomplish specific objectives and.
Yeah.
Yeah, period, and then say, recommendations. Do we need to
Will
say
be-
recommendations coming from the work group, or can we just say recommendations will be considered?
I
mean,
think that's.
Do we, yeah, I mean, to me, the that would make, it is implied that the recommendations would be those coming from that work group, but does that need any further clarification?
We could just say their recommendations, which refers back to the work group,
Yeah,
if you wanted to tie it together.
okay. And
And
then,
then there's a comma, the chair shall also appoint work groups, comma, as suggested by the behavioral health manager, the chair, the advisory board members, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe the last one is all work groups may include community members, to be a little bit more inclusive.
yeah. And I wonder if, yes, and you're right, we still have kind of a little bit of a language mismatch between whether we want a work group or work groups because we've got singular, plural, going back and forth.
Well, you
I
could
think it
say
should,
all
work
work
groups, I think it should be, yeah, work groups should maybe be at the beginning. Does
and
that make sense? Yeah,
yeah, and it will be appointed instead
Yeah.
of maybe.
right, right. Okay. All right, any further additions, edits?
Where it says their recommendations on the second sentence, I think we should put work group recommendations.
Yeah, that just for complete clarity. Okay. All right, if anybody has anything else to say, I'll give you just a second and then we'll move on. Okay, looks like it stands. Okay, Article 7, the minutes of the meeting shall be in accordance with the Open Meeting Act and in appropriate accordance with state or county statutes, ordinances, or procedures. Anybody have any edit to that? Okay, moving on to amendments. They may be amended at any regular or special meeting of the board. Written notice of change shall be mailed or delivered to each member at least 5 days prior to the date of the meeting. Bylaw changes require a 2/3 majority vote of the members present. changes must be approved by the president of the Board of Health. Yes, Lori.
That last sentence in there, changes in the bylaws must be approved by the president of the Board of Health. Is that our rule or is that the rule of the Board of Health? And if it's our rule, I guess I would suggest that it would be the entire Board of Health rather than just the president.
Mary, you want to say
Well,
something?
that in the past, mailed actually meant mailed. So do we want to say, is it okay to say email? Because obviously you're not going to be mailing things out to us or hand delivering them. That's old language. So I don't know how they say it now when everything is emailed.
Samantha, is there anything legally about the way people need to be notified?
No,
Okay.
either way is fine. Both ways are fine.
Okay, and I think that's a good point, Mary. And back to Lori's point, I believe probably why that language, and again, I don't know legally what the statute, I mean, I think I've got the MHAB statute up there, and I know the original statute that talks about the creation of a MHAB board. It definitely says that the president of the Board of Health is to appoint the members. So I'm guessing that's why, and that the president of the Board of Health, with the exception of the county board rep, which is appointed by the county board chair, who sits on this board has to go through the president of the Board of Health solely, and it's not been approved by the full board. I have no problem with it going before the full board. I think we just have to decide what makes the most sense, and if the statute, the statute does make it very much like under the, the board chair seems to have a unique role in the development of this particular entity. So, but I don't know that anything in the statute would preclude us having it go to the full board. Any other thoughts on that? Trish?
Okay, well, I wasn't sure if Mary was going to jump in, so I hesitated for a moment. I would echo Lori's thought, especially if, as the purpose of the Mental Health Advisory Board, was discussed previously, and it has a role to advise the Board of Health. I would then also think that changes and/or approval of the bylaws would go to the Board of Health and not just one specific person with the Board of Health. So I second what Lori is suggesting.
And ironically, at the last Board of Health meeting, when I reviewed with them, because I always give them a report on what has happened with this group, and I shared that we were working on bylaws, and I said, after we're all done, we will be bringing them back for the full board for approval. So I was under the impression we had to do that anyway. So you're keeping me honest if we make that change. All right, does anybody have any thoughts to the contrary on that or any other part of this? Okay, I think we have arrived at the end, right? Okay, so now let us go back. So Rick, I know you said you had seen a inconsistency in what the edits that were attached to the meeting agenda, and I had one too. So Rick, I'll let you go first. If you would please be kind enough to point out the conflict you noted, and anybody else that saw anything that they wanted to because I think now we're obviously needing to go back and go quickly, not quickly, but efficiently go back through everything again and make sure we're good with it so that we can actually move to approve.
Yeah, Corey, I mean, mine was pretty quick, should be anyway. It was in the minutes under section 3. It talks about 2/3 of the way through the third line. It says the committee members would vote on it. So I'm assuming that appointments and removals, it says the committee would vote on it. When you look at section 3 under the appointment and removal of individuals, it just says removal results from formal action by the advisory board chair with the consent of the Board of Health president. So that, to me, when I read that section, and I could have missed it in there, that didn't comport with what the notes said. And I believe that was our discussion. I think Lori brought it up, or maybe Dan did, that, you know, it'd be voted by the committee. There'd be a recommendation for removal and the committee would vote, was my recollection.
So
But
you're saying what's in the minutes that, or I'm sorry, what you're saying that what was sent out as the amended bylaws is correct. Is that right, Rick? Am I understanding you
No,
right?
what I'm saying is that what I believe is factual from my recollection was the minutes.
Oh,
And
okay,
discussion about somebody, a member who was going to be removed, that would be voted on by the full board, meaning the Mental Health Advisory Board. I could be wrong, but that was my recollection, and that's the way I read the minutes. But when I look at section 3 under appointment and removal, I don't see that language in there. It just says removal
Okay.
results from action or formal action by the advisory board chair with
Okay.
consent of the Board of Health president. I didn't see anywhere in there where it talks about the membership would be voted on the removal.
okay.
Does anybody else remember differently, or?
No, I think you're right. I do remember us having a relatively robust discussion about that. So the language should read, so Amy, are you with us? So this needs to be amended then to, let's see, I'm looking at the minutes and it would be, the committee members would vote. Yeah, members are appointed, so removal would be approved by the Board of Health president. We're going to assume the treasurer would be appointed. So any member, I'm trying to see where that matches up here. Okay, so under B, it's going to be B, right? After given a written statement of the charges from the board chair and an opportunity to be heard, any board member may be removed for absenteeism, neglect of duty, misconduct, or malfeasance in office by a majority vote of the Board of Health and/or Mental Health Advisory Board. So,
Okay.
yeah, so I guess it is in there. Okay.
That language is there. I missed that. Sorry, I read this quickly.
No, it's easy. Oh my gosh, there's lots of details. So, and, okay.
But up under like the second paragraph, right above A there, where it says removal results from formal action by the advisory board chair with the consent of the Board of Health president.
So we probably should just get rid of that.
I didn't know if that's in conflict.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. And again, the language that I recommended came straight from a statute, that exists that had all of that language in it. So I think we're pretty solid on legal ground for that. And Sam, I would ask you again, are we good with that? Because obviously this could become, a point of contention this could be something ugly that we certainly want to make sure we've got it well outlined. And I'm hoping we never, ever have to, this never occurs, but we need to make sure it's clearly written.
I think you're good at this point.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you for catching that, Rick. Does anyone have any other thing that we need to Did anybody else have anything that they saw in conflict? Lori, go ahead.
Are we talking about that same paragraph or moving to other paragraphs?
I was ready to move on, but we didn't, but I should have asked everybody if they were ready to move on. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
Not that one.
Okay, so is everyone okay? If anybody wants to bring forth anything additional on this, please do so. Okay, then Lori, go ahead.
Under that same the section or number 3, section 8, Board of Health representative is a simple word cleanup. That second sentence says the Board of Health representative shall provide the Board of Health members on updates. I would just strike the word on so that it would read provide the Board of Health members updates from the most
What
recent.
section was that, Lori?
I would strike that word on in the last
All right, are
sentence.
you still in section 3?
Yes, section 3. Mhm.
Okay. And where was it at again?
Under well, it's Roman numeral 3, so it's Article 3 and it's section 8.
Okay.
And that last sentence of section 8 says shall provide the Board of Health members update. I would strike the word on just to clean up the
Okay.
language. And I have in 9 would suggest that we say that the position, the one file, so section 9, officers, this position shall be elected annually by a simple majority vote at the first board meeting after July 1 of each year. So that we're not looking at, it's clear that we're not looking at a 2/3 majority or something like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think I had also one more under Article 4. It's the same thing that Mary Campbell mentioned about mail and email. That would be in section 6, Article 4, public participation in writing. Oh yes, so it's the 3rd line down, the 4th line down, in writing with the subject matter stated. I would say in writing or email or however to make it consistent with what we decided in the other paragraph. By email, I guess it would be. That's all I have.
Okay. Does anyone else have things? Okay, then I'm going to do a couple. Amy, I'm going to have you go way back to the beginning where it talks about the Article 2 purpose. And I believe it is number 4. It's identify priority focus areas, review and evaluate. Okay, identify, the language seemed off to me. Identify priority focus areas, review and provide feedback on funding requests. Okay, the reason why, well, let me do the easy one first and then we'll come back to that one. So number 5, it says the advocate on behalf of the behavioral health community. And I would say advocate on behalf of behavioral health needs of the community. Does that make sense? Because we're really talking about needs, not, yeah, okay. And then number 4 above, this is what has become interesting. And I don't even know that we have had, and so this is going to be a change that I don't know if everybody fully understands yet, but I don't know if you're aware, but the Board of Health approved a policy and funding committee, and it is chaired by Hannah Eisner. And it is made up of people on the board who have the most, I guess, probably the most knowledge and the most, and actually it was made up of people who also had the most interest in behavioral health related matters. And so this Behavioral Health Policy and Funding Committee meets on a regular basis and has kind of, decided to drill down very deeply into the whole application process and really look at where the efficiencies were and where it was not going well. And if you remember, we've tried through the years, we've tried about 15 different ways to do it where we were having at one point, the Mental Health Advisory Board reviewed the applications and remember, and then we had the open hearings where we had the members come forward. Anybody that applied for funding, came and did a interview process as well as submitting their written application. And Mental Health Advisory Board members and board members were invited to attend that. And then the recommendations were made. The problem with that is then the full Board of Health was then kind of re-reviewing those, even though some of the members had never come to those hearings. And so they had different information or limited information. And so at the last minute, when it would be literally the day to vote on the applications at the Board of Health meeting, somebody would raise an issue that should have been covered through that whole process, including getting input from this body. And then we would literally stop and say, well, we need to get more information to answer that. And so it became a real concern that if people were not going to do the work to really drill deeply into the applications and the interview process and ask the right questions in the timeline that, the behavioral health coordinator worked hard to outline, then it was becoming kind of a mess. And so that's kind of how this Policy and Funding Committee was born, to make sure that there was a group that did their due diligence along with input from the Mental Health Advisory Board, and then carried that back to the full board, so that we were not having board members who had not really done their homework suddenly kind of going down a rabbit hole. So anyway, having said that, that in many ways seems that Policy and Funding Committee has made some decisions along the way these past few months. And one of them is that, because of what is happening with funding, and because because each year the funding has remained pretty stable, and therefore it's only been able to fund kind of those core 4 focus area priorities, it has seemed that our work our work is less on deciding who should get it than, making sure that we're asking all the right questions of those core providers and making sure the core services are, covered well. And so that's why we've talked about going to a renewal application for the core services rather than, entertaining and making it look to the community like, oh, you've got a real chance at, getting money from the 553 board, because that's not been the case. We've come down to, and last year we even had to, painfully not fund the Project Oz Too Good for Drugs prevention program that, hits all the schools in the county because there literally was not money. So to get to the point, so it really has changed, I think, the role of what we're asking the Mental Health Advisory Board to do, in terms of no longer having the Mental Health Advisory Board by itself review applications and submit recommendations, because we're assuming, number one, that it may be just a renewal process of core services, at least for the foreseeable future. And then secondly, that to me, it makes, and so my proposal is that the mental health advisory board members that wish to should be invited to some of the policy and funding meetings. And you remember, we've had some blended meetings. And so it makes sense to me that that those two entities, rather than operating independently, there should be time when the mental health advisory board merges with the policy and funding meeting, so that everybody's hearing the same information at the same time and working together on such input. So that to me kind of changes how that wording in number 4 would be. And so it would be more identify priority focus areas, review and provide input into funding requests per the Board of Health. Because we're really not, at least my understanding of what the Policy and Funding Committee, again, under the whole board, has kind of moved away from having you all review the applications. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, and I want to make sure that therefore the language of our bylaws reflects that. And I would be very interested in your thoughts. And so we're kind of putting you more in, again, that advisory of help us know from the get-go what those needs are and advocate to us what the needs are. And then, putting that into that larger context. And I think the other thing that I tried to mention last time was that larger context that's happening in this community, which is, of course, all the initiatives that are collaborative initiatives. So everything from, the Community Health Needs Assessment, the Community Health Improvement Plan, which has its own priority action teams that also help design, design what services and supports should be put in place, and track and monitors those services and supports. And then you've got the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, you've got the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council that is looking again at broad needs and how those should go forward. You've got, you've got the ROSC now, the Recovery Oriented Systems of Care, that's looking at how to create a recovery oriented community. We've got the Trauma Informed Initiative, that's a collaborative that's looking at everything. We're talking about bringing back behavioral health in schools, which, puts all that. So again, we've got all these bodies that are out there doing that. And we're trying to figure out, how do we make sure that anybody that's helping make the big evaluative decisions is fully apprised of how all those pieces, all the information coming out of those collaboratives, and putting that together in an integrated fashion. So the recommendations fall under this large umbrella of, collaboratives under the Mental Health Action Plan. And we're trying to make sure that people making decisions are versed in those, versed in that context, and yet, and so we're getting the information, advocacy information along the way, but putting it in the context. And I hope that makes sense. And I'm going to say one more general thing, and then I'm going to shut up and let you all react. The other thing is that if you remember, Susan Schaefer is doing an update of the Mental Health Action Plan, and she gave an overview to Behavioral Health Coordinating Council on Friday, or kind of and Tricia, please jump in if there's something, and I'm not going to even try to summarize what she covered, but the one thing that I think is really critical that we also need to be aware of is that, and she pointed this out in her PowerPoint, that $90 million is coming into this county from the American Recovery Act. And an additional, is this right, Tricia? 800 million is available through grants, some of which are matching grants. And so we also need to make sure we are taking that into consideration so we don't lose opportunities to, jump on something that may be available, but that we also have to make sure that we might cover a matching piece of it. So also being aware of this massive influx of funding, which will go through, my understanding is through 24, is that right? We also have to figure out, how do we figure out what's going to get funded that wasn't funded before, and does that change how we look at funding for the next couple of years, but then continue to work towards a sustainability plan ongoing. So all of this has made this whole process so much more about context. And so with that, I'm going to shut up and let you give me feedback on what I just blathered on about.
Well, I'll quickly answer one of the questions you posed to me, Corey, and then I will also resume being quiet. But while I wouldn't have remembered the exact dollar amount, there is a significant amount of federal funding that is going to be distributed through grants, though some of those are being distributed as block grants to states to then send out as NOFOs. So there should be grant funding for a number of different areas, but the way it's being allocated varies. So I do know that there are block grants to states that are being distributed, and then it is up to the state in terms of how that looks for their particular state. But the amount for what is coming into the county, between the county, the city, the town, the school systems, there is a large amount of money with regard to the act that has brought that in. And Susan's point about matching dollars, just to clarify that one piece, was as she was discussing the mental health action plan and the different pieces, and also sort of touching a little bit on the intergovernmental agreement for the shared sales tax, was that one of its original purposes was so that if there were grant opportunities that required a matching amount, that was one of the potential uses of that IGA. And so she just sort of brought that to light again to remind everybody at EHCC. So
Thank you for that clarification. Okay. Okay. So thoughts? Yes, Lori.
Mine is more of a question concerning those federal funds that are coming into the county, at least $33 million. And I've sat through a webinar that was pretty much a high level overview of what that involves. But I've just been wondering, and we've had some conversation and context at certain county board meetings about it. But I just was wondering who at the health department is looking at what money the health department could obtain through that, the American Rescue Plan, and whether any of that would filter down into this committee's responsibility to look at that.
Yeah, and my answer to that is I know it's being looked at, but I think, and I don't know, Amy Hancock, have you and Jessica had any specific conversation yet about looking at that? But I think that is going to be and again, this has not yet become an agenda item for the Policy and Funding Committee, but I'm certainly guessing the Policy and Funding Committee would want to look at that. So, because again, the whole point of that committee is to really drill deeply into figuring all this out, how it integrates and how the funding coming from those sources is, being, carefully looked at for grabbing what is appropriate and doing what needs to be done to make sure that, again, it's being used in a way to move forward the mental health action plan, the health department strategic plan related to behavioral health, et cetera, and the chip and the China and their priorities. So, so again, I feel, and I've had this conversation with Amy repeatedly. I feel in a way that I want so much for the Mental Health Advisory Board to have a critical role and to make sure that it maintains its very important function, which is to kind of be that independent body that really is that strong advocate for the needs that are being that are happening all around us, that some of you live every day and can bring to us. And so that's a very vital role you play. But I do feel like we've kind of changed your role in terms of, because at one point we really just, when you started out, it really was to review the applications and go through that application process and then say, well, here's exactly how we recommend the money be divided up and everything else. And we're kind of taking that role off of you and moving you again into more of that advisory advocacy piece. And I just wanted to be real clear that you really understood that change has occurred from the Board of Health perspective. And so I think going forward, again, what we need to do, and I'm glad we spent a lot of time on the work group work, because I think some of what may be helpful to make sure that we are bringing forth in a strong way the areas of need, and become that advocacy, that voice, is through a work group where, where a work group may do more in-depth research and have a package that includes that more data-driven thinking and brings it forward. To me, that seems like a important role for this group to play. Yes, Tricia.
Well, I'm wondering, so as I'm hearing a lot of the points that you're making, Corey, and also pairing that with Susan's overview of the mental health action plan and also the update to it, and also knowing what the intent of that document originally was and what the intent of the update is. And perhaps the change hasn't been reflected here, but as I'm also sitting here looking at item number 2 of what the advisory board shall do, I continue to just be struck by that is essentially what the update to the mental health action plan is to look at what that data and what the trends and needs deficiencies are. And I feel like I would at least be remiss if not to bring that up. Does that need to remain in there if that is being captured from a big picture perspective in an action that is already being taken elsewhere?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. And I think I almost said that, that I just kind of said the opposite of that, which is that we're going to do the research. And I guess what I meant by that was that we would not try to take over a function that is being already assigned to a much larger entity, like you're saying, with the big picture focus. But again, if we just had an area of, for example, I know this group, feels very strongly about the reentry, helping people transition back and into the community. And of course, now there's a whole initiative that's been formed to work on that. So I think it does, I feel like this group almost is going to just have to stay, I think part of what we have to do is just make sure that we continue to be so aware of what big picture is unfolding around us. And when we identify a need, that we're always checking to make sure that what's already in place, and should we just be plugging into a larger collaborative that's already in place and not doing something parallel. Because I think we all know that you lose the efficiencies and effectiveness if if we've got isolated groups doing some of the same work. So, and right now we've got so many big collaboratives, it's, yeah, figuring how we fit. But again, because of some of the expertise on this group, I could see where it might be that, again, the board, somebody on the Board of Health says, let's tap into this group to, you know, give us more information about X, which is exactly what, you know, again, fits right into that advisory capacity. So given that new context, and again, does anybody have any, I mean, does everybody kind of get why that's become so huge? Because I think with the Behavioral Health Coordinating Council being kind of and again, am I right, Tricia, that really is the overriding body that's kind of trying to take all these things and get them into an integrated plan, right?
Well, so I wouldn't use the word overriding, only because my perception of that word is perhaps a little bit different. But I would say that it is the body, although I'm going to backtrack just a tiny bit and say the mental health action plan is largely the overarching sort of movement for the county as a whole, and not just the county organization, but sort of collectively as a community, and is much more county board driven than necessarily BHCC, though it directly involves BHCC members, but it also involves people who do not sit on BHCC as well. So I would say that that's really the big piece. I think based on my both current and historical understanding of BHCC and a number of the other groups in the community, including this advisory board, is I would simply say I think sometimes the purpose is different and there can be overlap, but the purpose and scope is slightly different at times.
Okay, thank you. All right. But having said that, I think I want to just look at these 5 things again and make sure that we're kind of figuring out our fit again to make sure that it's right. And so I think, you know, number 1 is certainly okay, because again, you know, the conduit is through, but I wonder if that should also say behavioral health program manager and chairperson. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, well, and again, believe me, I'm so sorry, but this has been so much on my mind of how to make this all fit. And what has occurred to me that sometimes doing the agenda work for these meetings is where a lot of the thinking happens. And so I'm almost wondering, and I also don't know that I've ever made it very clear that anybody can, you know, can put forth something that they'd like on the agenda, you know, that can be a discussion point. And again, that doesn't mean it's going to become something that a path we go down parallel, but it could be something that we flesh out and make sure we've carried forward to the bodies that are, you know, charged with doing this work, all the collaboratives that are going on. So I don't know if I got thinking that perhaps it makes sense even to have some shared agenda building at times where, you know, whether there should be, you know, a little bit more outreach from the chair to the membership to just double check and say, is there anything that you would want, you know, that fits into the focus areas? Because again, we're not going to keep adding when we've already got some focus areas identified, but is there anything within the focus areas that, you know, you would want to add to the agenda? Or is there any or is there some burning, emerging need that needs to be discussed at a meeting? And whether there needs to be a more active outreach from the chair to the membership. So what do y'all think about that? Or should that be more, it's your responsibility as a member that if you have something like that, you would know you need to contact either Amy or the chair to do that? Yes, Lori.
Maybe it's something we want to put in writing, but I think if you make it clear that you're willing to accept items for discussion or to be put on as action items, potentially, I suppose, I'm not sure of, but that we are free to bring these forward to you, I guess, directly to you. Is that I mean, I guess maybe just outline what the process is for getting something on the agenda as a discussion or potentially as an action item. I'm not so sure it would be appropriate to do it that way.
Yeah, probably not an action item, probably a discussion item, which could turn into an action item. Yeah, but I don't know. So Amy, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, sometimes I guess, and again, I'm trying to always think about this in terms of not me, the chair, but the position of chair. So I don't know that, and I mean, if each of you, since at this point, we've talked about, again, the chairperson, if we open it up, would anyone that might become chair be willing to, be that person that reaches out? Or again, do we make it more of a, the responsibility is on the membership to contact the chair? And I guess I'm almost thinking it should come to the chair, and I don't know, what do you think? Or, I mean, do we want it to always come directly to the chair so that there could be some discussion between the chair and the member, or let Amy be in that role of conduit? And again, this is where it's hard for me to be separate from the position versus me, because thinking me, I would love to have the conversation so I know exactly where the member is coming from and get that fleshed out. But I also don't know if the whole point of having a behavioral health program chair is to, be in that role. So what are your thoughts? And I feel like now we're deeply into, process as well as bylaws, but there is some overlap. So that's why I'm making us get into this.
So coming from a position similar to Amy's, I can only offer the insight in terms of how it functions for BHCC, which is that if a BHCC member had an item that they wanted added to the agenda, then it more often than not comes directly to me, and I have the discussion, and then I take my plan for an agenda to the chair of BHCC, and in my case also to county administration. Like, it's a conversation between county admin, the chairperson, and I.
Yeah.
And so that's at least what the process is on my end for insight and perspective on that.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that? So at this point, then, we will leave, rather than muddy the water and have people think they have to contact two people, maybe we leave it as is. So knowing that, work closely. And do we want to say, I mean, and again, I'm assuming that people understand that work closely means that if there was something any member wanted brought forward, they would know that needs to be discussed with Amy for adding to the agenda. Amy?
So if I can intervene real quickly, I'm getting confused. So there's a lot of discussion happening, and I'm not, just to be very transparent, I'm not exactly sure where we're at this point. So we were talking about like the 5 purposes of the advisory board. And I don't know if there was any other feedback on that, except for it feels like the purpose of them makes sense as far as by statute, that the Mental Health Advisory Board is really in support of the county's public health, the Board of Health, what that looks like. And I know there's other county initiatives, there's tons of county initiatives. It's a very rich county in a lot of ways. And so it's a very rich county, but like as far as these purposes, it definitely feels like it fits into what the Board of Health would need as far as that feedback. And then the other thing too, as far as like when we're talking about like making the agenda, so I have 3 different boards, 3 different boards that I make the agenda for. And it's always just contacting and talking to that chairperson. However, I tend to have a pretty close relationship to all of the board members on those boards. And so if they have feedback or, hey, looking at this, then I just take it to that board chairperson. I don't think it needs to be any more complex than what it seems to be working out well, and people seem to be happy with what's on the agenda, and it seems to have focus. And I know that the board chairperson of all those 3 boards also has a really close relationship to all the members and talks to them. So as far as like the process of like creating the agenda, like I thought like all of that's transparent and following like, well, this is what's on our timeline, or this is what the board chair wants to do. Or also a lot of times the boards will talk about things they want to do in future meetings, and then the chairperson will bring that to the agenda. So I'm not sure if we're still really talking about that, or Corey, are we now talking more about the chairperson and the connection to?
Let's get there. Yeah, thank you. Let's finish this up because, okay, so Tricia, I believe you made a comment about 2, is that right? Was it 2 that you made the comment about that's kind of what other entities are doing? Did you make that comment?
I did make that comment, yes.
Okay, so is there anything that we should change about 2 to better reflect how we're actually operating? So should it be?
Well, so your response, Corey, was that as it stands, that item is really in response to specific requests, perhaps from the Board of Health.
Right.
Or from specific membership.
Right.
So I wonder if just adding that clarification, again, that was your response to me. So I wonder if adding that language that if it is at the request of the Board of Health or specific membership.
So just maybe add per the Board of Health request and I think we actually talked about that last time and decided we didn't.
About that last time, and the board this Mental Health Advisory Board was against that because they felt like, and I think it was all the board members talked about how it's the statutory right or the responsibility of as this board to be able to bring things to the Board of Health. And so the Board of Health isn't going to know. Part of the function of this is there's going to be things they want to look at more, but then there's also going to be things that these members will bring to the Board of Health. And so I feel like number 2, even looking at the statute, and it relates back to the Board of Health and that relationship with the Board of Health, and as it relates to behavioral health, public health. I feel like I think we need to be really careful with number 2, or else we really kind of lose the focus of what the purpose of this board is.
Other than if there are bodies that are already doing that work, then it should be done in collaboration with, and maybe we just need to add something in there that says in collaboration with other relevant. My point being, if there's a group, if there's a collaborative that is going deeply into a particular topic and doing the data analysis and all of that, then we would want to be part of that and integrate with that as opposed to starting off on our own. So that's my only point, is how we capture that because there is so much going on that we want an integrated, coordinated, collaborative response to the focus areas. How do we make sure that we make that clear in that work?
Right, and I agree with that, and we are doing the collaborative stuff right now. This, even like the behavioral health program is extremely collaborative. So for example, the initiatives like United Way, their Youth Coalition, their Housing Coalition, we're doing outreach with integrity. So it's not, right, so I don't know if it's just implied or it's inherent that like we're
I
not.
wonder if we say analyze in collaboration with in collaboration with any existing entities, and just add that after analyze. So that we always start by making sure that we're not doing something that is already being done. That's my point. For example, we started talking about doing a whole reentry thing. Remember, we had one meeting where we said, oh, we really need to put something together and we really need to start maybe doing a work group on reentry. And then voila, the reentry council we found out about. So again, and so it makes much more sense for this group to become part of that larger reentry effort than us do something separate from that, which is, why you've got that good information in your packet about the upcoming meeting. And the first meeting,
language of being, right, like collaborative and some things too, because I think like whose responsibility is it as far as collaboratives? Do we invite ourselves to collaboratives? Do we wait to be invited to collaboratives? And also like, we're not always going to know about collaboratives. So thankfully being part of the ROSC helped us know about that collaborative. So I think like collaborative is a really good word versus just kind of stepping out of the way because someone else is looking at something.
Yeah. But I'm just also trying to say, be part of our duty, I think, is to inform ourselves, to stay very informed about what is happening, because so that we don't contribute to parallel entities. I mean, I feel like, again, with this body having an important role to play in the whole mental health world within the county, we do have some responsibility to understand how we fit into bigger pictures. And so it's almost like part of our work of number 2 has to be also educating ourselves about what's currently happening. So, and again, I'm making this very belabored, I apologize, but I just think it's kind of an important point. So maybe,
Excuse me, Corey.
yes.
Could I just suggest that number 1, work closely with the McLean County Health Department Behavioral Health Program Manager? Would that not help ensure that the things you were just talking about and Amy together would be happening, that if we were truly working closely with that person, that position, that person would be knowledgeable about the other collaborations going on in the county and could help guide us in that way, and that we don't have to necessarily make a specific separate statement about that. I mean, maybe that's just an assumption on my part.
Yeah. I would hope that would be true. Yeah. Okay, in the interest of time, I would throw just a couple things. I would still add to number 2 something about analyze and educate, analyze and inform, and be informed about behavioral health research and data. Something about, and maybe analyze behavioral health research and data in something, I want to say something about in the context of existing, or in the context of current, I'm so sorry. I guess what I'm trying so hard to go for that integration, because that to me, because we have a richness in this community, and our best way forward is to stay very integrated so that, you know, we make sure that everything we're doing is so well managed that we don't waste a dime, so that any monies that can be teased out by not being redundant or duplicative can be made available for innovative things. Go ahead, Mary.
Would the word "in collaboration with" bring those other entities into the conversation?
Yeah, that's what I had suggested, is they analyze in collaboration with, but I wasn't quite sure how to put what other entities. Maybe analyze with other. How about analyze in collaboration with other initiatives, other relevant initiatives, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
other existing initiatives or.
Right.
So, or analyze, in collaboration with.
That may be need to start the sentence, in collaboration with other
Yeah, perfect, perfect. Okay.
existing
Thank you.
entities.
Thank you. I feel that does it. Thank you, Mary, for getting me off of my loop. And I think then 5 keeps us in a role of, we aren't totally boxed in by only looking at what exists, that we can through advocacy of needs we see, bring forth some innovative thing. So I think that does it. And then the only other thing I would say, Amy, is change 4 to identify priority focus areas, review, and so we're no longer evaluating the funding request. We are reviewing and giving input, I think, on the funding request. Providing input. Okay. All right, is everybody ready to have me be done with that? So sorry. Thank you for your help. I do appreciate it. And I just want to be so clear on that. I do feel like we kind of have muddied the role that you started off with, and wanted to be clear about that. And then the other thing I wanted to point out that was in conflict was on the bottom, on the bylaws that Amy sent out that were the amended ones. It was on the bottom of the first page of the amended bylaws that she sent out, and it was section 1, number. And can you go down to that, Amy? And it said, in the absence of a vote to the contrary, the Board of Health member should serve as the presiding officer. That, I believe, is in conflict with what we said at the last meeting, because at the last meeting, and it's also in conflict with what the minutes that were sent out, because they talked about the chair would be appointed by a vote. And again, so I feel like we're revisiting ground we already covered, but I do just want to take this opportunity. And again, I'm trying to not think of this in terms of me, the chair, but the chair, and why I think that, and I can't remember when my 3-year term is up, but probably fairly soon. So I'm not fighting for me, I'm fighting for the position. But because of everything I've said, going on and on about how important the integration is, and how important that somebody deeply understands what's happening in the policy and funding committee, now that that's become a real way that this drilling deeper into the needs and the resources and the data and putting that all together, I almost feel like there is some reason why the Board of Health member should continue to be the presiding officer, so that they would hold that knowledge and bring that forward. And it almost seems to me now that the member should not only be a member of the Board of Health, but should be on the Policy and Funding Committee, since that's where the work of really looking at the application process and how dollars, and how to look at where all the dollars are coming from, including starting to think about other funders, and how that there might be some, eventual pooling of monies or whatever. I don't know. So I throw that back out again. And I did not put that on there. So that when it was there, I thought, well, that's interesting because I'm going to take this opportunity to revisit that. So your thoughts? And again, go ahead.
Oh, Corey, I was just gonna say, I agree with your recollection of the last meeting, that I do think the discussion was about voting on a chair. However, I was also going to speak up and identify, I think there is such relevance of needing to know the context as it relates to the Board of Health and that Policy and Funding Committee, that while I understood the reasons for the recommendation to vote on a chair, I think that would be a very difficult position without simultaneously being the Board of Health representative and serving on the Policy and Funding Committee.
Right.
So I agree with all aspects, both that it was previously discussed differently and the benefit of it being somebody who is on Board of Health.
Yeah. And thank you, Tricia, because Tricia joins the Policy and Funding meeting, so she understands what the work is, you get what the work is happening there. I'm wondering, do you think it should say the Board of Health member, or should it say a member of the Policy and Funding Committee? Should that actually, or are we, and again, I'll throw that out to Sam, or are we really putting ourselves in too much of a box there in case that committee would go away? So maybe we should just leave it at that, and with the understanding that the policy and funding piece of that is very important. What do you think, Tricia? Should we actually say member of the Policy and Funding Committee?
Well, I wonder if the easiest solution is just to make sure that the Policy and Funding Committee includes the chair of the Mental
Okay.
Health Advisory Board.
Okay.
I wonder if that's the easier way to do that, but I also saw that Lori had her hand up, so I don't know if she has something else to add to it.
Go ahead, Lori.
I like what you just said, Trish. I think that makes some sense. I just want to throw out for thought to people that to too closely entwine these two things, I think risks the possibility of having an echo chamber. I mean, the purpose of this board is to be advisory. It's not to necessarily be one and the same as. And I don't know how many people, could you tell me how many people are on the policy and funding committee under the Board of Health?
There are
Uh,
5.
How
There's
many?
5 health members.
12 members? Okay.
5.
5.
5 members. So that the fewer members, so that even to me makes me more concerned. I think that it's not, then you're 1/5 the same thing. And I think what we really want are different voices to be heard and different ideas. Otherwise maybe we become irrelevant as a advisory board.
Right. That's what I am concerned about that. But I'm also concerned about how we really promote that important integration without, you're right. It's really, that's the dance we're dancing, the importance of integration and coordination and efficiency and effectiveness without losing some independence and some, I've gone back and forth 1,000 times. So I would throw that out again. Are we back to where we left it last time, or staying with this. And I would ask if anybody, because the language in the minutes is finding that again. Let's see. Where was the language in the minutes is, help me find that real quickly. Amy, where is it in the minutes, how it was worded? Here we are. It was, the position shall be elected annually at the first board meeting after July 1st of each year.
And I did highlight, and I'm sorry, I can't change my screen off of this or else it will,
Gotcha, I get it, yeah.
I can look at other things.
Yeah, I found it.
So I'm pretty limited, but just to also clarify with what Corey's saying is this sentence that we added on the number, in the absence of a vote to the contrary, the Board of Health members shall serve as the presiding officer. We seem to be contradictory, and then saying in the later part about having a chairperson that may or may not be from the Board of Health. So we need to adjust somewhere.
Amy, could you scroll to, so hearing your statement, can you scroll to the section that shows voting on a chair if it's in a separate place then?
It's in the minutes that you got. It's in the minutes and it's under
Okay.
Article 3 members on page 2 of the minutes.
And here it is, Tricia is highlighted
Okay.
9 for officers. And it does, I think we talked about the first part before we got to the officer part, and that's what ended up creating that contradiction. But it does seem like they're weirdly separated.
Yeah.
Corey, I can think what I'm going to say about the above section, and everybody can discuss, but if a member of the Board of Health will be on the Mental Health Advisory Board, I am concerned with almost directing the board, the Mental Health Advisory Board, to elect that person as their chair, which is what that above, without a contrary vote. I mean, it makes it a done deal, because someone would have to speak out and say, I don't want you as the chair, People don't like to do that on these boards. And
Right.
I really think it should be more open-ended than that. And if that person's the right person, that's the person who will be elected.
Yeah. Yeah, I just would, I almost feel like this goes back to if the policy and funding committee, I almost don't know that we right now have the right to tell the policy and funding committee that they would always have the chair of the Mental Health Advisory Board, if it's not a board member, would be part of that funding committee. And it's not that that's not a good suggestion, but I wonder if that needs to be at least discussed with them before we would put it into this language. So that's a thought, to have that discussion. The other thing that I know has come up is that we now may have people that are on this board that may at some point be someone who might file for an application for 553, And if that person would become chair, would there then be a conflict of interest if they're going to see the applications and they might also be an applicant? And so they might actually be in competition with. So I don't know. And again, I feel like my goal is not to make this so laborious, and I'm so sorry, but I just feel like it's kind of, there's kind of some important things to tease out. And maybe for right now, just so that we can move on and improve it, we leave it as we had it at the end of the last meeting. And figure out through conversation between now and when the actual health department board might approve these, to decide what we do about membership on the policy and funding committee. Does that make sense?
How was it that we left it? I've lost track of that at this point.
Well, it would be back to this position is elected annually at the first board meeting after July 1st.
I'm okay with what you just said then.
But then I do feel like there needs to be that connection to the policy and funding committee, but I don't know that I alone as the board rep, am in a position to, without consulting them, say that that will happen. So I feel like that needs to be a discussion that gets added in. So so anybody weigh in differently? And maybe we literally, do the majority of people feel that this should be the chair position should be a voted on position as opposed to just naturally being a board member? And if so, why don't you raise your hand, or do we have to do a voice? That's not a motion, I guess, but I guess would be interested in people's thoughts about whether you would prefer that it be a voted position. Is that the general consensus? Because that's apparently what it was last time, I think. So does anybody have any strong feelings differently than that? So I think that this is something that my point is, I want to bring this back to Board of Health members and Policy and Funding Committee members to have more of a discussion. But coming from this board, it will be left as it was last meeting. So then that thing would be struck out of the sentence that you highlighted would be struck out of this, Amy. The one that you highlighted that was in conflict with what we said last time.
Okay, so officers, this is staying the same, if I'm hearing correctly. And then then the absence of a vote to the contrary, strike that out.
If that's the general consensus of the group. And I'm hearing, if that's not the general consensus, then speak up.
Okay, so it sounds like the general consensus is keeping in the bylaws to have a chairperson voted on.
Yes. And I just want to, again, be real clear with everybody that then I will be taking that back for discussion with how we integrate that with the Policy and Funding Committee.
Because then with the Policy and Funding Committee, this board feels like it's important to have someone on this board to be represented at the Policy and Funding Committee. But then the Policy and Funding Committee is a subcommittee of the Board of Health members.
So that's why I'm feeling like this has to be discussed. Yeah, I don't know the logistics. Yeah.
It sounds like the board, or if the Board of Health member, so this board will continue to have a Board of Health member on it, whether that person is a chair or not a chair. So does the person that's on the Board of Health, if they're not a chair, can that Board of Health person still be on that Behavioral Health Policy and Funding Subcommittee instead of having a non-Board of Health member on that? Because I feel like, yeah, if we're going to make it too complex if we say a mental health advisory board chairperson has to be on this behavioral health, Board of Health subcommittee, but I don't know why the Board of Health person, even if they weren't chair, that Board of Health person, if they were on Mental Health Advisory Board and the Behavioral Health Policy and Funding Committee, could be that connection to help eliminate that conflict of interest, if that makes sense. So still having a chair that's not necessarily Board of Health, if that's what this board is interested in, but still having that person on the three different, the Behavioral Health Subcommittee, the Mental Health Advisory Board, and this. So, and I hear Lori saying her concern is it's going to be enmeshed too much if it's, okay. Just wanted to make sure I was following and throwing out another option.
I think for now, we leave it as it is. There will be further discussion and again, I don't know how the feedback loop can be about that, but we could have a feedback loop after discussion with appropriate Board of Health members. But this will be what will be carried forward to them, what we have right now. Okay, are we good? Okay, does anybody have anything else, any other corrections or points to note that should be, that we haven't included or? Okay, so then are we ready to, do people want to see these one more time before they vote, or are we ready to vote? Having kind of gone through much of it twice, other than the last few items.
And I'm not even sure if we still have a quorum at this point.
I
Okay,
would say that.
I'm not sure if we even have a quorum at this point. A
Okay.
lot of people had to leave.
okay,
So maybe it makes sense for this to be an information item or discussion item for the Board of Health in July. And then when we come back in August, this board has any feedback and then can go from there. So then that way, if there's going to be feedback from the Board of Health, they can have that feedback before then voting on the edits. And then
okay, so, yeah, and so everybody, our next meeting is August 19th, and that may or may not be in person, depending on what the guidance is through Open Meetings Act and other things, but so you will get notified, closer to the date of the meeting about whether it's going to be virtual or in person. And so thank you for hanging in there. And I apologize if I made everybody a little crazy with my trying to sort through this carefully. Okay, so was there, and again, I wanted to thank Tricia for clarifying. When I said $90 million coming into the county, she's right, it's $90 million coming into the state, right? And that some of which will be in our county to be used for behavioral health. So we're excited to figure out how all that's going to play out. And certainly the schools have gotten lots of money, so it'll be interesting too to see how they decide to spend it. And I'm sure some of that for some districts will be on behavioral health. Okay, are we at a point, is there any other, Amy, did you have anything you wanted to add under items for discussion?
No, just that in your packet was the kind of the monthly update, the June monthly update on initiatives within those three focus areas for the Mental Health Advisory Board.
And again, I would highly encourage anyone of interest to be part of that, to zoom in on that on June 25th, that reentry council meeting. It was a it was very, it was a very well-attended, well-represented meeting with, you know, seemed like all the big players that could help really make things move this forward. So, okay. And any other business? Okay, then I would move to adjournment, and I don't think we have to take a vote on that. And thank you, those of you that hung in there. It's been a long meeting. I apologize. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.